Hopefully, welcome back. I am Kalisa. This is Busy Reading Romantasy. And if you've watched any episodes so far, you know that I haven't written an intro yet. Still haven't gotten that far. We'll get there someday. Also, I have a bad time saying no. And so today's been quite the hot mess, but it doesn't matter because today I'm here with Dylan, a man who reads.
Hello, it is me. I'm back again, a man who reads.
How are you?
Doing good, wonderful today, ready to talk about some books.
Perfect, perfect. Can you just start by telling everyone like what you do, where to find you, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. I'm Dylan. I read. I read everything.
Yeah.
Obviously, most recently I've been reading romance and whatnot, but I'm starting to get back into fantasy. Uh, you can find me on Instagram at cybergoosey. And then you can find me on TikTok at dylanreadsalot. Um, just kind of, there's a link tree in there as well, so you can find all my stuff. But yeah, I mostly just post silly book content or book reviews or me thirsting after fictional men and women.
Amazing. Perfect. Perfect. So we met a few months ago. Also, if you've been watching this podcast at all, you know that I came from another podcast, and that's where I originally met you like July, August, September, like
Mm-hmm.
4 months now.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, we had done a little series where we were just interviewing like book talkers and bookstagrammers to just see uh what their thoughts of being in like the book world was. So absolutely go check that out if you're interested. It's over on Book and Bottle podcast. Um, but since then, we've been chatting, and you had mentioned how much you were enjoying Butcher and Blackbird and Leather and Lark. So I
Yes.
wanted to add those to my list, and finally, we're here. I've read them. So
Finally.
surprised.
Four
So
months later.
surprised. I got there eventually.
Hmm.
Um, yes. So obviously, this one we're going to be talking about Butcher and Blackbird, and then we will follow it up with the second Leather and Lark, and then I'll just have to invite you back when we get the third
Hmm.
finally. Um, Overall, just to start us off, a few of your highlights, thoughts about this book.
The first book, Butcher and
Yes.
Blackbird.
Yes.
I really enjoy the banter, right? Like just the
Yes.
banter between the characters is what I really enjoyed from the beginning. Like it sets the pace. Um, Rowan is interesting and Sloane is very interesting as well. They're both so the characters themselves are both so different but also very similar, right?
Mhm.
They each have very distinct personalities, and I feel like it kind of meshes well. Um, Overall, I will say that the, you know, trigger warning, the gore in the book is something at certain points, but at the same time, I think it's more so of like what your comfortability is in general with those things. So like me, I've personally am not a big eyeball person, so like those parts
Fair.
had me like, but
Yeah.
you know, I still got through it. I enjoyed it. I will say I do enjoy slow burn as well. So like the fact that, we got there and when we did get there, we got there. It was good. Um, but overall, I just enjoyed the concept too. Like the concept of the entire thing, it kind of reminded me of like competitive Dexter, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good way to describe it. So, if you are not familiar here at Busy Reading Romantasy, is this a romantasy book? No. But as the owner of this podcast, I do get to have a little wiggle room in doing whatever I want. And this became a book that I definitely wanted to cover. Um, there will be spoilers throughout this from now on, just so you know. And yeah, lots of gore, lots of triggers. You should probably check that out before we kind of do. I like to do like a speed run of the plot pretty much. We'll give our thoughts around specific points. Dylan, interrupt me absolutely at any time something
Hmm.
pops up. And then we'll kind of just talk about the book as a whole afterwards. So the book literally starts with a bang when there's a whole bunch of like rotting maggots around a body, and you're like, oh, okay. I will say, I think it's interesting when I hear enough chatter about a book and I get like other people's thoughts and opinions and maybe their reactions. I will say, I think based on how people were reacting, I was expecting worse. And then I read
Hmm.
it and I was like, oh, personally, I can handle that.
Yeah.
But
I
again,
think it's like you said, like people's reactions to the beginning part were a little extreme, but obviously everybody's different, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Everybody has their different things. For me, I was just kind of like, oh, that's gross. But like not like not like, oh, I'm never gonna,
Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah.
And one of the overlying themes is how wonderfully comedic this book is with being so murderous and gory. It's just amazing. That was the most surprising thing to me
Hmm.
ever. Um, so this is where we're introduced to Sloane and Rowan, both serial killers. They go through all their fun little names that they've been given, and they decide to go to dinner. What was your first thoughts about each of them?
So I do think it's interesting that he's just like, oh, you've never heard of me, or he's like, and he's giving off all his nicknames. And he's like the butcher, and like, and she's just like, hmm. Like,
Yeah.
and she's like, and she's, she's playing it cool. It is what it is. Obviously, she's also in a weird predicament when they first meet, right? So, like, she's
Yeah.
caught in a cage after she just killed somebody, but
Hmm.
she's still trapped. And so she's like, do I trust this guy? Why is he here? All that stuff. Because I mean, I would ask the same thing too. Like, why are you in this? Why did you show up to the serial killer's basement?
Right.
You know? Um, but I did think that was interesting. Hers being, the orb weaver, right? And it's just like,
Yeah.
okay. And at first you're like, but why? And then obviously throughout the book it explains why. I do like the whole, like you said, dinner. And but what I like about it is that it's at a diner
Hmm.
and they're just having this conversation about everything that they've done or do in a diner where like anybody could be like, you know.
Yeah.
But it's definitely that comedic thing, and it's also a classic scene, right? It's a classic scene of a diner, a couple sitting down for the first time, meeting and like
Yeah.
chatting and flirting, and then but in the juxtaposition of like this really crazy setup to like why they're there.
Yeah. Yeah. Casual conversation for both of them outside of
Mhm.
the norm of what most of us would ever talk about. And in a kind of last ditch attempt for Rowan to keep Sloane around, he's like, let's play this game, see who can catch a murderer first. And I was like,
Mhm.
brilliant. I did think that the majority of the book would be about them catching one specific serial killer, murderer.
True, true.
Wrong. I was wrong.
Wrong. We were very wrong, yeah.
Yeah. But it's fun and you're like, okay, let's see where this goes. Um, Eventually they get the location of the first murderer and the game is on. This is where we start to find out a little bit more about Rowan's family. He has two brothers, and immediately I was like, oh, this is the leather and lark. Um, and we start seeing more of their banter. The brothers are all like joking with each other and all that. And then one of my favorite parts is when Sloane is on the plane and she's like, safe travels, get fucked. And I was like, yes, I love this energy.
Yeah. I do think getting introduced to the brothers very early on is definitely interesting too, because like, obviously when I first read this, Leather and Lark wasn't out yet. Like I had just
Fair.
read Butcher and Blackbird. I knew Leather and Lark was coming out because I had seen it in the like, pre-order and all that stuff. And obviously on the book it says Ruinous Love trilogy. So it's like at first I was like, oh, is it about the same couple for three books? And
Mhm.
then when you get introduced to the brothers, you're like, no, okay. And then obviously at the beginning, you also do get introduced to Lark, right? Through
Hmm.
Sloane's point of
Oh
view.
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so you're like, oh, okay. So maybe, one of the brothers at first, before you find out what Lachlan does, at
Hmm.
first I was like, oh, which one is it? And then it explains, and I was like, okay.
Hmm. Which I do think it's interesting that it's set up, obviously for each brother. It's really cool because I just reviewed the Souls trilogy by Harley
Hmm.
LaRue, and that was something very similar where I literally said this is the first time I ever read something like this where each book was a different couple, but it was running through, there was an overlap of events, and it was really cool to get the different perspectives to seeing how that changed the dynamics of a scene.
Yeah. And then we're also talking about where how you thought that it was just going to be the one person that they were going after.
Yeah.
Um, and it turns into this like annual game, right? Rather
Yeah.
than like, and then the only thing that and I need, since you've recently read it, they talk about the the first person or whatever that they're going after, right?
Mhm.
But it's like, did they go after that person or was it elusive? Did they not find him? Because then when the person that they do go after, the first person that they go after, it's not the same location as what they were talking about. So that
That's a good point.
I was like, hmm. And so, and also, I don't know if you caught it, but each of the people that they go after
Mhm.
is an allusion to like a famous horror movie.
No. And this is why I
Yeah.
invite other people to talk about things because stuff like that really just like,
Yeah. So the first person they go after is the man in the hotel, right?
yeah.
So they go to the hotel and then like, they're talking about like, oh, there's these people that are disappearing out here and yada yada, and they get into it and then she's like, well, I'm going on this date. And she's trying like, is she trying to make Rowan jealous at the beginning? Right, whatever.
Hmm.
And then she comes back and Rowan's there and he's like listening through the wall and he hears her start to, have fun with herself and he's like, huh, and he's like puts his ear up to the wall and she's like, going to town and then he hears the guy inside the walls like
Hmm.
touching himself and that is an allusion to Bates Motel, the movie Psycho.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah.
So, and also there's other hotel movies where they do stuff like that. Obviously, they chase that guy down.
Hmm.
They're competing who's going to kill him first, yada yada.
Yeah. And that's where we get to Rowan absolutely like losing it, going
Yes.
crazy. Then
Yep.
he's calling out for Sloane because she disappears for a moment. She's about to leave because she's like, whoa, and then decides to come back. What were your thoughts around that scene specifically?
I think that he like he loses his shit, right? Because one, it's not only like him probably letting loose whatever dark part of himself that he has, which
Hmm.
causes him to go after said serial killers or bad people or whatever it is, right? Because I'm sure in some moral high ground in his head, like he's like, oh, I'm nothing like these people, right?
Right. Yeah.
Which in the harsh reality of looking out at it from like an outside lens to inside, like obviously, yeah, we're rooting for these people because they're the people we're reading about. But if you're a
Right.
rational person, you're like, oh, they're crazy.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
this is psychotic.
Yeah.
Um, and like, are they doing a service for the world?
Yeah. I
Debatable.
do think that's like the beauty of reading is how
Yeah.
like kind of picky and choosy you get to be as a reader because you're like,
Hmm.
no, but they're good. But like
Yeah.
again, doesn't apply to
And
real life.
yeah, and like in the moment where Sloane leaves, right? Like
Mhm.
where she's like, I don't know, what do we like? She's hesitant, right? Because she sees this dark, monstrous part of what he is capable of
Mhm.
when he's killing this guy, but then she chooses to stay. And so like that made me go, oh, okay, maybe she sees a part of herself in him, right? Because
Right.
obviously she has those moments too. So
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So all that happens. the game is that game's done, over.
Hmm.
And one of my random notes, I love to just throw in stuff without any context. I put, she has anxiety. Love that. I
Hmm.
don't know why I loved that. Maybe just makes people feel like relatable. Also interesting. I think it's interesting. The idea of being able to to murder people and have anxiety are just, those two are hard to
Yeah.
go together in terms of
Yeah.
like worrying about being caught and like just like over, I don't know. For my type of anxiety, those
I
don't
could
go.
see what you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah,
But I think also anxiety was probably thrown in there to like make her more relatable to the reader because like
absolutely.
I feel, or at least in our experience in the real world, when we look at these people who have done things that are similar, right?
Mhm.
Most of those people are psychopaths or, sociopaths, so like they don't really have the same like specifically people with patterns, as
Yeah,
people, I'm sure people who are listening or watching are fans of true crime and stuff like that and have read stuff about serial killers, like they may not have access to the full range of emotions that we have, but I
right.
would say as a way to like humanize and ground the character, she was like, "Oh, let's give her anxiety." Like it's the,
Yeah, yeah,
which
no.
is fine.
The,
Um, but I do think it's interesting. And then obviously like there's the time between the game and like the rest of the time like until the next game where they're like texting back and forth, which I really enjoyed the parts with the text messages, right?
yes. Yeah.
They're texting back and forth. They're obviously having the thoughts that they have about each other, where
Hmm.
like, oh, do I want to admit this? Do I? It's a little, it toes the line of miscommunication trope, but
Yeah,
not enough that I don't like the book because like
fair.
when miscommunication is a heavy thing, I can't stand it.
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And slightly disclaimer, I'm absolutely not like a true crime murder
Mm,
girly. It's just not.
no. Okay.
But I love this book, so it works. Um, so we get to the part where, as you said, at post game, they go their separate ways. Sloane is very much like, no, I don't have feelings for him. That's not possible. And then she decides to show up at his restaurant randomly one day. It turns into a hot mess. The hostess gets distracted. She was supposed to, later we know she was supposed to alert Rowan that Sloane was there. Sloane gets a table, and then she's like, I gotta leave. This is weird. Lachlan walks in. Rowan is like screaming across the restaurant, trying to get her to stay. We get another girl, Anna, who shows up, and Sloane's like, I'm out, and leaves. And like that becomes a whole hot, hot mess. What were your thoughts on this part?
I think it's funny that secretly Rowan was like waiting for her to show up,
Yeah.
right? Because he's like, oh, if you see a girl who looks like this, she needs this table, like,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
I also think it's crazy that Rowan is like this. I don't know how famous he is of like a restaurant, like a chef, right? Or a
Yeah.
restaurant owner. But obviously in the premise of the book, like he's what relatively well known because the restaurant's busy. He's successful enough that, like we said, spoiler alert, another restaurant gets opened. And, for
Mhm.
those of you who are in that world, having two restaurants is a big deal, specifically in Boston, where he is.
Yeah.
So like he's well known, and the fact that he could move through like life well known and still get away with like what he's doing,
Yeah.
that's crazy to me. And when I say that is obviously we'll talk about it later, is and how well known he is because he gets invited to things that like only
Yes. Okay, I did
yeah,
think about that. Yeah,
yeah.
that's a good point. Also, I don't know if you've seen The Bear, but like that is
Mhm.
the only restaurant that is like my basis of all restaurant
Yeah.
information. So I just like pictured stuff from that.
I would say if you've seen The Bear, picture later seasons of The Bear once it's an actual spoilers
Yes.
if you haven't
Yeah.
seen The Bear, once it's an actual restaurant.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. So Sloane leaves
Mhm.
and this. then this is one of my favorite parts of Rowan is when he decides to go down to where Sloane's at, and then he's paying this kid to drop off meals to her house and then talk her through how to cook them on the phone.
We
I
love a man who talks you through it.
I just love that amount of effort and thoughtfulness
Hmm.
and just like love those things.
Yeah. It's it's definitely interesting because like at any moment that kid could feel like, yeah, this guy pays me to drop this stuff off here. But you
Right.
know, that kid's also like, I'm making money, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Um, I do think it's funny that like she's the first one to show up because she's like she kind of caves into how she feels.
Hmm.
But then like he obviously is just like, I'm just gonna stalk her and sit outside of her. Like, but I
Yeah.
also when I was reading it, it was funny enough. When I was reading it and it's talking about like him where he's hiding and all that stuff while he's watching the kid drop stuff off or like watching her through the window or whatever. I just
Hmm.
imagine that meme of Shaq standing behind like the tree where he's like, because I was like, there's no way that like
Yeah.
this guy's just out here, like across the street, just like leaned up against a tree or like sitting in his car leaned back, and nobody's like, hey. But
What's happening here?
yeah.
No, absolutely.
And I think, is it disclosed where Sloane is? Because like with him, it's Boston, right? But I think like hers is still like,
I think so.
I'd have to go
Uh,
back and find it.
let's
But
see.
it's definitely somewhere where she obviously has to fly to, yeah.
Yes. Let's say like, oh yeah, Raleigh, North Carolina.
Oh, yes, 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 North Carolina.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she talks about how she has to go to different parts of, yeah. And it's
Mhm.
crazy that we talk about his job. We don't even talk, we talk about like she has like a big job where she goes to conventions, she leads things, like she's this,
That is a great point where all of a sudden she's like, yeah, I have to go and like speak at these things and I hate it. And you're like, what?
yeah.
Okay.
And you're like, sure. And it's not like it's a disbelief thing. It's just that like
Yeah.
it's these people who have such full, busy lives that still
Yeah.
somehow find this time to take on these dark urges, which
Right.
again alludes back to, well, I would say alludes back to Dexter, where he is like, I don't know if anybody's seen Dexter. The show's been out for over 10 years at this point, but he's a forensic scientist who works for the cops and he's a serial killer. So it's like,
Yeah.
it's like you're so busy, but you find this time to get your hobbies in.
I do feel like murdering is a more time intense hobby than like your casual like I'll crochet
Well,
occasionally for like
it's
20 minutes at a time.
It's especially when they talk about all the information gathering that they have to do to find these
Yes.
people.
Yeah.
And like,
No.
but then again, it alludes to is with Rowan, like with her, she's obviously doing this all herself, right? Like
Yeah.
Sloane's doing this all herself, but with
Yeah.
Rowan, is Rowan doing all of this or is it Lachlan finding all this information for him,
Yeah. True.
right? Because it then we have the nods to that Lachlan's involved in something darker
Hmm.
than just being a person that works at a leather shop,
Of
right?
course.
And it's like, oh, okay, well, what's that about, right?
Yeah.
And and then of course the younger brother being the doctor and all that stuff. And it's just like,
Mhm.
okay. And so I do think that it's very interesting. And we have him like taking all this time off from being a busy restaurant operator to like stalk her and be like, I'm just gonna teach her how to cook all this food because she doesn't eat well enough.
Clear my calendar this week. I'm busy.
Yeah. Guys, we're closed.
Yeah. We'll reopen later. Um, yeah, no, exactly. So now it's time for their next game, year two, right?
Hmm.
And this one, again, Sloane pulls out her charm. She's whining and dining with the best of them to catch their prey. I love Rowan just being like, "Oh, I'm here now." He just shows up like a friend and becomes part of it.
Yeah. I do think the obliviousness of Rowan during that entire scene is what makes it for me
Yeah.
because like she knows the whole time,
Yeah,
right? And she doesn't
absolutely.
think to like let him in on it, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
She's just
Well,
like,
he doesn't deserve to know. This is a
yeah,
competition.
yeah. So I mean, sure, I guess. Which
Yeah.
another allusion is to Silence of the Lambs. So
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, see, I haven't
yeah,
seen. Oh, well, my
it's
friend tried to show me that
Silence
one.
of the
We kept it
Lambs,
secret.
Hannibal, all that entire world,
Ah,
right?
okay. See, I was
Um,
terrified of horror movies for like too long in my life, so I
okay.
have no good
So
foundation.
yeah, and then this is where we get the questionable parts of the book, kind of, because like you have this guy who's really strange that has people over for dinner. He has this weird manservant that you're like, what did he do to him? And
Hmm.
they're being served this food, they're being served wine, and then like you said, like Sloane's just going along with it. Rowan's like, oh man, I love this wine and I'm having so much fun
And
and
you're so beautiful.
he's so beautiful and he's like letting all these feelings out because he's drugged. And
Yeah.
so and then he, eats some of the food and that food so happens to be, you know, a person.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's rough.
yeah.
That is rough.
And then yeah, and then that's where we get the like I said, the eye stuff I've kind of it's but
Fair, fair. So again, you if you're listening to this, most likely you've read the book at this point and you know that Sloane's whole thing is around eyeballs. What was the running joke? He was like, she's like,
stick
sh-
a something I think I have it.
she's like, I don't gouge them. She
Yeah.
had a way.
Uh, yeah, she's like careful about the way that like she like they joke about he's like gouge eyeballs out. She's like she makes a joke about that she doesn't do that, but I can't remember off the top
Yeah.
of my head. It's
She plucks them. Is that
oh,
she
she
doesn't gouge
plucks
them out.
them.
She
Yeah,
plucks them. There we go.
because she's a blackbird.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. So she has officially round won that round. They're 1-1. And this is where we also meet the butler guy.
Yeah, the bottomized manservant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Another interesting part around the ice cream.
Yes, which it's a point of contention in the book. There's some people that are like, I could never eat cookies and cream ice cream again. There's some people that like, I want ice cream, and I'm like, okay. Um, I've had people say that in comments and in like live
Yeah.
videos where they're like, this made me want ice cream more, and I'm like, it says something about you, but it is what it
Okay.
is. But yes, the manservant, he's eating ice cream and they take it from him and they're reading it. And one of the ingredients is, we're all adults here. It's cum. And
Yep.
so they're just, Rowan is just so repulsed by it. But that's also because he also just ate part of a person. So he's just like, and I think the other thing is when he wakes up, right, and Sloane's doing everything that she's doing, like he's just so mad about the whole situation. Like,
Right.
how could you just let this happen to me? And all that.
Yeah. Ho- Maybe hot take. I think I'd take the ice cream over like human meat.
That's,
Yeah.
it's not a hot take. That's fair. It's a rational thing. And
I
then th they make that weird moral decision to like save the guy,
yeah.
right? And
I
it's
don't
just
know. I
like,
found that weird, but I understood, but weird.
yeah, obviously later on,
It becomes a plot point, so you
it's a plot
understand
point.
why that
Yeah.
had to happen. But I
Yeah.
think, yeah, it was a weird thing for Sloane to be like adamant about.
Yeah. Like she was very adamant about like we need to save him. And I'm just like, do you? But at the
Yeah,
same time. And then
it makes sense
um,
eventually.
yeah.
Yes. So we get all that. That's like the
Hmm.
crazy part, which again, I don't know. I think it was just written so humorously and like such good banter that it felt more comedic the whole time. I
Yeah.
was never particularly grossed out, but also maybe that's just me. I don't know what that, that says about me. But yes. So she has her win. Also, okay, her art. I don't know if it's this one or the next one. I think it's a little bit later still where she explains how she creates her art. I had a
Hmm.
terrible time envisioning this in my head. Like, I just pictured stuff everywhere. And I know she explains it of like level
Yeah.
one is the topography and level two is the whatever. And it sounds really good. As a reader, I could not picture it for the life of me. How I think it
Um,
was intended to be pictured, maybe.
yeah. I kind of saw it as like a spider web kind of, but like of was it fishing line, right?
Yeah,
Or,
yes,
yeah,
yeah,
so like the spider web that like as you look at it, it has like this thing, but then I think what is it? They explain later that like the different parts that are like the centerpieces of it are like
yeah.
isn't it like locations or something?
Yeah,
Or
the victims, I
yeah.
think. Yeah.
So it's definitely interesting. But like my whole thing, or I think what I I feel like obviously the story, yes, is about the two, right? And
Yeah.
like obviously the next book is about those two, but I do feel like maybe adding in that third POV of like someone investigating everything,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
Would just bring like another layer to it all because like you'd have like this maybe not a hard case investigator, but just in general, like this detective or something that's like chasing, not chasing them, but like investigating what's happening. And they have all these assumptions about them. And then we cut back
Mhm.
to their POV of like them just being absolute idiots together. And like, so
Yeah.
I think that would take it above and beyond, but I do enjoy what was written.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do like that. Absolutely. Absolutely. So they have started to add in some new rules as well as they go, as this continues to become a thing. And Rowan decides he wants to call in his win, his little favor. And so she agrees to go to a gala with him. As you mentioned, that becomes a big thing of like, you're a well-known person. You're a well-known person who ends up opening a store, a restaurant called Butcher and Blackbird. It
Crazy.
becomes a crazy thing.
Yeah.
Um, so they go to
Wild.
this gala and she is really feeling him and she's like, okay, maybe actually there's something here until he suggests a murder. And she's
Oh
like,
yeah.
oh man. She kind
Hmm.
of deflates and then he has to leave because there's an emergency. And I, as a reader, felt the frustration. I was like, no, they were so close. And of course, slow burn, gotta pull them apart, can't work out that way. But man, I was frustrated.
There's an emergency, but I feel like it got deflated before even the emergency happened because,
Yeah,
like, obviously, emergency pulls them away to the point where they can't come back from the deflation. But,
yeah.
like, she was so into whatever was happening. She was like, he's so handsome and he's,
Yeah,
like,
we're
good
gonna
around all these
dance and
people. And
yeah.
I look good in this dress and, like, all this stuff because she was hesitant about going at first. And then all of a sudden, he's like, yeah, we're going to kill this guy. And she's just like, I thought you wanted me here to be with you. Like,
Right. Let's be
and
normal people.
yeah. And so I understand her frustration. I also understand where he was coming from because he was like, oh, this is something we can do together. You understand me, that
Yes.
type of thing.
Yeah,
And then, he leaves, she's deflated, and then we get what the next part is the third game, right?
absolutely. So this is where we meet the Meads.
Yeah.
Sloane wins, and so she goes in first and she sees mummified Mama Mead.
Hmm.
And then she goes and finds like the camera room, turns around, immediately gets knocked out.
Hmm.
Hilarious moment when she keeps mentioning like the boot print on her forehead. That's a whole thing. She wakes up, maybe she breaks her arm. Not great, thrown in a cell. It's not going great. She texts Rowan, who comes in, attacks, saves her, right? And he does prolong the kill so she can play. I don't remember this too much. That's just
So
what my
this third game is the probably the biggest illusion, which is to Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
that does
Because
make
it's
sense.
it's a house in the middle of Texas, in the middle of nowhere. It has mummified Mama Mead, which is a big point in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies. There's the mummified grandfather, or
Oh,
he's
gotcha.
mummified, kind of still alive. It's a weird thing.
Yeah.
Um, you have this big hillbilly guy that's like killing people with chainsaws and hammers and whatnot, and just this big, guy. And yeah, like you said, Sloane gets caught. She gets thrown in a cellar that has
Mhm.
no way out. There's another woman down there that's
Yep.
like, "Help me!" And
And
like,
they're like, no, actually,
and they're
we'll
like,
come
"We'll
back.
we'll come back for you."
Yeah.
Rowan does prolong the kill, and like it's so Sloane can like take the mummified corpse of the mom and be like, "I'm so disappointed," and like she's crawling it up the son's like body to the
Yeah.
point where he dies of being scared.
I love
Like,
that.
and she's doing this voice, and she's like, and like, and the
Yes.
son dies of being scared because his mummified mom is crawling all over himself.
Yes.
And, but more importantly, before this kill happens is the first kiss.
Yeah.
And it's like, let's just stay in here and forget about all that. There's a woman screaming in a cellar. There's this guy looking for them. But they do have their first kiss, and then they do, like you said, they kill that guy, and then they end up on a road trip while they're fucked up because they got fucked up by that guy.
Yeah, pretty hard.
Hmm.
So his solution is let's go to my brother. He's a doctor. How did you Well, okay, you listen to the audiobook, don't you? How
Yeah.
do they say his name?
Fionn.
Okay. I think I said that as well, but sometimes my brain just gets a little wonky when we're reading quickly.
Hmm.
It's just an interesting, obviously very Irish name.
Hmm.
But oh, pause. Actually, fun fact, I looked it up to confirm it when we were first moving to Texas back in
Hmm.
my high school days. We're moving just north of Austin, but one of the places that we looked at was on Slaughter Lane, and I was like,
Hmm.
Mom, no, we can't do that. That's not
So, okay. Common misconception, people. Uh, the movie that came out in 2003, which was the remake of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and this remake very famously has Jessica Biel as the leading lady, right? That movie's marketing system was like based on a true story, right? It led super into like based on a true story, based on a true story, all this stuff. And I remember this because I lived in the middle of nowhere in Texas at the time, and I was young. So obviously, like I see this poster, I see the trailer when I was at another movie, and I'm like scared, right? And my mom takes me to go to the movie and doesn't tell me what the movie is. Obviously, the trailers that are coming on are for rated R movies because this movie was rated R.
Yep,
Then the movie starts. I'm terrified for 2 hours.
naturally.
And then we drive back home in the middle of the night in the middle of nowhere, Texas, between cornfields. And my mom plays this prank on me that the car dies and like she can't get it to start. And then like I'm freaking out. It's this whole thing. And then obviously when the movie came out on DVD, they had all these like physical evidence things that you could have, like forensic evidence that they found
Mhm.
in the houses and stuff like that. And then there's like an option where it's like this deleted scene where it's like found footage of the cops going into the house at the end of the movie.
Right.
And like he just busts out of the basement at the end to like kill the cops. And it's like they were never found. So like I'm like, did this really happen? Did the Texas Chainsaw Massacre happen? And like, no, it's all based off of one serial killer from Wisconsin or Wyoming, one of those. It's a W, I do remember that. Named Ed Gein, who did similar things, but mostly it was grave robbing type stuff.
Fair. Fair.
And he actually inspired Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Psycho, and actually a lot of the modern thrillers that we have, or not thriller slashers that we have. So I do think that's interesting, and I do like that they nodded to it in the book. But then, like you said, they go on this road trip to the brother, and like my whole thing was like, how long was that drive? Because like they're hurt,
Fair
like
point. Yeah. No,
yeah.
absolutely. They are not in great shape. And
Mm-mm.
key moment of the road trip is Rowan is really struggling, man, because he noticed our lovely little Sloane got her nipples pierced,
Hmm.
and he is way too excited for that.
Staring, and he's just like, oh, piercings. I'm like, all right, calm down.
Yeah.
But
So they make it to his brother's place. His brother is obviously not there. That would be too easy. And this is where we meet Rose, who goes full on attack until Rowan confirms his identity as Shit Flicker. Again,
Hmm.
just great humor
Hmm.
put in there. And it's all great. Sloane gets, patched up as much as she can and everything. And this is where we get to they're gonna stay the night together in the same
Hmm.
place.
Hmm.
I love this. He was like, I'm gonna put you in your place. I'm gonna make you beg. All of this. Oh,
Hmm.
exciting things.
Yeah, it was very much the like, you've never experienced this before, and I'm gonna make you experience it. She's like, okay. And then he's actually about it, and she's like, wait a minute.
Wait,
Hold on. Yeah.
hang on, hang on. So she wakes up and having had her arm reset, she needs help getting in the bathtub, and
Hmm.
he's like, uh I love how she's asking him if he's okay because clearly
Hmm.
again he's having a rough time, and she even encourages him. It's like you're doing great, all that. He absolutely loses control. He's like, we're gonna do this right now. And he sees all of her piercings.
She's
She
got a lot.
has a lot down
She's
there.
got a
It
lot.
more than I thought. I guess I knew nothing about genital piercings. So this book did teach me
Yeah,
quite a
she's got.
bit.
I remember when I read it, I was like,
Yeah,
I looked up some of them. I was like, okay. And I was like, it's each their own, right? You know?
absolutely. Absolutely. It's something I love reading about something new because otherwise my brain just would have not probably ever had concepts of that. Um,
Hmm.
he goes all Dom. He's like, makes her lay out. Oh, I love this was my first time seeing also the stoplight system and coming fresh off of like the Smut Lovers conference when they're talking about like all the safety practices of like make sure we're talking before. Obviously, you need
Hmm.
it to be consensual. What are your safe words? What like they were
Hmm.
talking about the stoplight system and how you need to also, you need to have an understanding, like an agreement of what each of the lights mean, because like
Hmm.
my yellow might be different than somebody else's yellow. And like he was like, boom, bam, bam. It was such a great, concise way to do it. And yeah,
Yeah. Um, let's also put into perspective for everybody who's listening,
yeah.
and obviously people who've read. It's been 4 years since they met each other.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Four
The
years
tension has
of
built.
tension, slow burn, pining,
Hmm.
all this stuff, and he's finally like, "I'm begging you, like, just
Hmm.
please."
Hmm.
And so,
Yeah.
and that final payoff of like, I can only imagine for them, because for me, I'm only, X amount of pages into the book, and I'm just like, please, and it finally happens. But for 4 years,
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. Oh, and like, excellent. My notes verbatim is when he goes, be a good girl and find something to grab onto because I'm about to destroy you. Destroy indeed.
Hmm.
They knock off a whole bunch of stuff
There's a
right off the bat.
there's a bunch on the list that's just it's gone. Yeah.
Yeah. What what are your thoughts about that? Just because I think I've read a lot of obviously slow burn. I've read a lot of not so slow burn. But I think
Hmm.
this is like one of the few times, and granted, I will say now I think I pay extra attention to books just like because I need to have a commentary on them. But I think notably, this is the first time where I've read like a first, like I would still count this as part of their like first kind of go at it, whatnot,
Hmm.
and like all the things they do. Anal everything and you're like, "Oh, okay, like cool." I don't have a problem with it. I
Yeah.
think I just like pointing out maybe unique things because I don't think I've read that yet
I
where like
yeah.
right off the bat.
I think it's like the ramp up that's just so sudden too, because he's like,
Yeah.
I'm not holding back, and I'm just like, okay.
Yeah.
It's like, and I guess that lends to itself of like they have been pining after each other for 4 years, so like
Yeah.
obviously they're both okay with how far it's going, which obviously, like you said, like before, everybody's level of something is different, right? So
Yeah.
like if she's okay with backdoor stuff at their first meeting, then
Yeah.
that's on her to make that decision, right? And
Yeah.
but then of course like we have that first time where they go crazy and then they fall asleep, but they don't really fall asleep. Like
Yeah.
he falls asleep inside her and she can't sleep.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm just gonna lay here. And she's like, but I can't handle it. I need to
Yeah.
touch myself while he's inside me. And then she starts and he's like, what are you doing? And she's like she got caught like a prisoner with the spotlight trying to escape. And he's just
Yeah.
like, no, no, no. Like I'm just like, okay.
I don't know. I don't know if you felt this way, but I feel like in a lot of books that I read, like you have the tension, and then even when it gets into, smutty sex scenes, that tension still builds until there's like a climax. When they have their climax, you kind of get your climax as a reader.
Hmm.
I feel like in this one it was kind of different where like we had so much tension and then when we finally get them being intimate, like that was like it was just like boom, 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 boom. You're not kind of like, I don't know what I'm trying to say.
I
You know what I'm
I
trying
f-
to say?
I also feel like what was crazy about the them finally getting to it is that every time they got to it afterwards, it was like they were escalating,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because it's like when you do all this crazy stuff at the beginning, well, what's next, right? What's next?
Yeah,
What's
that's a good
next?
point too. You have to
Yeah.
build it. You don't want to just read the same
Because
thing five more
obviously, like
times.
you said, you don't one, like you said, we don't want to read the same thing 5 more times, but I'm sure you've read books where it's like on page three, they're fucking on page 300 and something, they're finally doing it, right?
Yeah.
And so and like I've read books that at the beginning, from the beginning to the end, it's constant, but
Mhm.
they always have to find ways for it to be different because
Mhm.
if it's the same scene over and over again, I don't have
Yeah.
to keep reading the
Yeah.
book, right?
Yeah, I think what I was trying to say was that like in these scenes when there's so many elements to it, and obviously every time they're like doing it multiple times, that kind of like from that first the tension is already alleviated. So like they're just going, 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 boom, boom, boom,
Hmm.
rather than I feel like maybe a traditional scene where like the tension is only increasing even if they've already started the intimate stuff because you're still waiting for that end. But
Yeah.
rather you get it and it's like, okay.
Mhm.
It's a bit of a different feeling, I think.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So all that happens and they yeah, they get a lot more honest with each other and kind of the general worry is like destroying each other and just kind of like when you have two people who enjoy unaliving people, where do
Hmm.
you draw the lines? Are you trying to be a normal couple? Are you trying to like, and also what kind of fucked up stuff have you been through that has led you to where you're currently at in life? Like there's a lot for them to kind of discuss and figure out what that might look like.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting, like you said too, because like up until this point, they really only have like surface level things about each other. Like they know
Yeah.
what each other does, they know what each other really does.
Hmm.
But they don't know like why is Sloane the way that she is? Why does Rowan do what he does? Why did they become, why did they choose the day life that they chose, right?
Right.
Um, Obviously she doesn't know about like the deeper relationship between him and his brothers. He doesn't know about her deeper relationship with Lark,
Hmm.
stuff like that.
Hmm.
And then, like you said, they start becoming really honest with each other. They open up more. They have to decide, okay, well, can we make this work? And I think that's an interesting thing too.
Hmm.
Like, can serial killers make it work?
Let us know if you're a
Let us know.
serial killer. Write in, please. We'd love
Maybe, I
to
don't know.
feature. And then he's like, you know what? I'm taking you back home to Boston. And she's like, sure.
That honestly, I understand we have to suspend disbelief a lot for things, but the
Yeah.
fact that he's just like, you're coming with me, you don't have a choice, you're
Mhm.
moving. And she's just like, all right,
All right. Cool.
like
Okay.
that's obviously whatever she does for work, she doesn't have to be centrally located anywhere, which,
Yeah.
power to you. But just upping your life randomly, because I'm sure that she has friends. Because like really socially, like the only person that we know she knows is Lark, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't
Yep.
really delve into her deeper life in Raleigh. Whereas with Rowan, like he obviously has friends that work at the restaurant,
Yep.
has
Yeah.
people that he knows outside of that because he gets invited to these galas. They know him. Like
Hmm.
it's so like, and I guess I get it. Like it can't be like, oh, Rowan, you're gonna move to Raleigh, North Carolina. Like it's
Right.
yeah. So
Yeah. Yep. So she shows up in Boston and he's like, "Look what I've created. Butcher and Blackbird, new restaurant.
also crazy.
Love that." And he's created a special table for her, equidistant to the exits, all those considerations. And that's when she pops out that she loves him. And he eats her out on the table.
Yep, there we go.
Great times. They do start to feel the strain of living together.
Mhm.
Obviously, it's tough. He, miscommunications or, things that he is going through. This is where it does become a problem that he's going through a lot of stress relating to the restaurants and whatnot. And then we kind of get into this like final battle, right? The final obstacle before we get our resolution where Rowan essentially gets caught and he's forced to tell Sloane to leave. And she's heartbroken until she starts putting things together. What were your thoughts around all of that?
Uh, Mind you, he gets caught by the guy that Sloane was so adamant about saving because
Yep.
apparently this whole time this guy was looking for them,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Um, so he made himself be like, "Oh, I'm gonna be your manservant," while and then these people are gonna show up, and it's such a long play. Like that's wild to me, because obviously from the time that they saved him to the time that this happens, it's more than a year.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like
No,
this guy was
absolutely.
waiting for
Yeah.
this. He
And
was
they were
like,
like, he's such a good employee.
yeah.
Like, it's
And
fine.
he's mandolining Rowan's arm, like when he's like cutting slices of his arm off and he's eating. I was like, oh, okay. And then, like you said, Sloane's smart enough that she puts it together, like
Yeah.
based off of some
Yeah.
of the stuff that he says, and then comes, saves the day, you know?
Yeah. I do think it's interesting how she like put stuff together in terms of
Mhm.
like the dates and stuff like that. It took a hot minute, but she got there.
Yeah.
And
But that's what that guy gets for monologuing. So,
fair, yes, true that he in hindsight shouldn't have wasted so much time. So Sloane shows up to save the day, but she's like pretending to be on David's side and everything, and
mhm.
that how eventually they get the kill. They make up. He proposes because they're so in love. Uh, at a later murder via documents inside of an eyeball socket.
Mhm. Yes.
Thoughtful,
Hey,
unique.
you know, he cares about our interests. We love a man who supports your interests, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that happens. He proposes via eyeball socket. She says
Yeah.
yes, right? Um, and I think that's like what after that it's just they go to Lachlan's and they just like there's like an event that they're gonna go to or something like that. And that's when, because also another subplot in the book is like Lachlan and Lark's like interactions as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, where he's like babysitting her and like all this stuff, and
Yeah. Yeah.
they're like, ah, blah blah blah, big
I
grumpy.
do I love how Sloane's like, I think they're hooking up, and then you read Leatherlark and they just
Yeah,
like hate each other.
yeah. Um, I will say if there was anything I would change is the way that the not I don't say the way that the book ended, but there's like the epilogue
Yeah.
and then there's the bonus chapter, right?
Yes.
I would have put the bonus chapter as not a bonus chapter, but like before the epilogue, because I feel like the bonus chapter takes away from the tension of the end of the book,
Oh yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because as we know, the end of the book happens, the epilogue happens, and it's from the POV of the Phantom,
Yep.
and he's talking about how like you took something from me, I'm gonna take something from you, and he's talking about Lachlan.
Yep.
And but then the bonus chapter happens and it's them getting married, and I'm like, it to me, I just personally felt like if the marriage had happened and then they went to see Lachlan later and then
Hmm.
it cut into the epilogue, I feel like that would have been a good like what happens next? I need the next book. I
Yeah.
need the next
Yeah.
book.
That is a great point because yeah, you get all that tension of like, oh my gosh, someone is actually after them.
Yeah.
And then you get Rowan in a dragon onesie with two dicks running around.
Yeah,
Which,
double dragon dicks,
like,
just like her
again,
smut.
so thoughtful. What a
Yes.
man.
What a man. Men out there who are watching this, maybe, um, for your partners, dress up in a dragon onesie and
Yeah.
have a second dick. You know what I mean?
Read just a little bit,
Just a
and
little bit.
your world will open in exactly what.
Yeah.
Yes. No, that's great. Yeah, so that's pretty much the whole thing. What were some things you loved about it, some things you maybe didn't love about it? If there's
Um,
anything additional to what we've already discussed.
I would say I feel like, and I think we've talked about this, like in the second book, we do get more about the brothers, and
Hmm.
I feel like we should have gotten a little more in the first book about like background information
Fair.
about them. Specifically Rowan. Like obviously leave the Lachlan stuff to the Lachlan book, right?
Yeah.
But like expand more on Rowan as a character.
Yeah.
Because we did get a lot of Sloane stuff where we found out
Hmm.
that Sloane killed somebody for Lark that
Hmm.
was abusing Lark. And so it's like, okay, so that's how she got into all of this, right? Um, and now she's branched off into I'm gonna kill all these bad people.
Yeah.
Oh, mind you, isn't the last guy that killed the guy that they were supposed to kill at the gala, right?
Yes. Yeah, he
Yes.
come.
So
Yeah.
they do end up actually killing that guy.
Yes.
And that's the guy that he proposes to her with, which I don't know how I'd feel if I was her in that moment because unless she finally realized what he meant by the gesture, right? Not by the
Right.
proposing gesture, but by
Yeah.
offering to kill that guy.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I like the smut. It was good. You know, nothing groundbreaking, but it was definitely,
Right.
up there. Um, I mean, well, the dragon onesie was definitely groundbreaking.
Yeah,
But
that was pretty great.
other than that, I mean, there's not really much I didn't like about it. The only question that I had was I probably just need to reread it was like my or actually, hold on. Let me real quick while you give your thoughts.
Absolutely. So, my thoughts, like I said, I was surprised by it. I liked it a lot more than I thought I would, and I think, as I've mentioned only like 5 times before, the humor really did it for me in terms of having that right next to such gory murders. I agree. I think when books are, this is like the average 300-ish pages, just over. So like when you get something that's short, there tends to be a lot of stuff that sometimes you kind of just have to go with it. There is maybe, as we've mentioned, a few little gaps around like being notable people and murders. It's a little tough. And kind of some quick like move in with me. Okay. Um, but overall, I really enjoyed it. I liked it. And I liked that it's not something that I typically read, and I still really enjoyed it, which I think is always really special.
So I think where the confusion lies, where I talk about the first killer that they go after,
Yeah.
is they talk about how it's on page 20. They say the killer is a phantom, a prolific one, exacting and very, very careful. He prefers hikers, campers, nomads with few connections in this hunting area. He tortures them, and it's like in the Pacific Northwest, right?
Hmm.
And at the end, we get the epilogue and it says the
The
Phantom.
Phantom.
And
Yeah.
so I'm like, did they never go after the first guy? Right?
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Um, or did they never find him? Because then in the next chapter, it just cuts to 1 year later.
Yeah.
It's already been a year
Yeah.
and they've already established the game, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, hmm. But then, unless I'm just misreading it and the person that they're going after 1 year later, because they're talking about the little game and it's just like, first one to win or first one to win gets to kill him, yada yada. And then he's like, let's talk about it. And then it cuts to 1 year later and they're talking about, sorry, I just read it it's probably such a pretty dick. Um, they get their like location of the first guy and so if maybe it took a year to get the information, that first guy that they refer to as or as a phantom in the Pacific Northwest is that first guy in the hotel. But then I think that was my point of confusion, was
Yeah.
really it. Because obviously at the end we get the epilogue where it is the phantom, and you're just like, hmm.
Yeah.
Now
No.
I will
Yeah.
say I did listen to the book, right?
Yes.
The voice of the book of the phantom in the epilogue is different from the voice that we hear in.
Okay.
So I was just like, which obviously that's different narrators, but you get what
Yeah.
I mean.
No, that makes sense. Gotcha. Very cool.
Yep.
Awesome. So, what did you rate this out of five?
I think I rated this 4 out of 5.
Okay,
Yeah.
same, same. What would have made it a 5 out of 5 to you?
Well, what was in the bonus chapter of the second one.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So, we'll get there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, now you got to listen to the next episode to find out what Dylan wants.
Yep.
And yeah. So I am very curious to know what your thoughts were of it. Do you read a lot of crime, murders? How did the goriness affect you? All the questions that I'm dying to know. Um, yeah. And then otherwise, next week we'll have the episode out on Leather and Lark. Let me remember what I say for my outro. You can listen to Busy Reading Romantasy on YouTube and Spotify. And you can also follow me on Instagram and TikTok. And I do post different content to both of those. So ideally, you should be on both. That's for best results. So yeah, absolutely let me know what your thoughts were of this book. And I'm really excited to hop into the second one. All right, Dylan, any words of closing?
Uh, Go follow her if you aren't. Come on. What are you
That's so
doing?
sweet.
But yeah, also same thing. I post different content on Instagram versus TikTok. Obviously I don't have a podcast, but I do talk about different things as well. It's a school year, so I'm still kind of busy, but in December, I do have a break coming up, probably a month-long
Yeah.
break. And during that time, I will be live on TikTok more, so we can talk about things and just come hang out.
Perfect. I look forward to it. All right. Eventually I'll find a great way to end this, but yeah, thanks for watching.